It's a pleasure to welcome our second panel, who are representatives of the WASPI group, Debbie Despon and Angela Maiden. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself very briefly, please?
I'm Angela Madden, and I'm the chair of the WASPI campaign.
And I'm Debbie Despon, and I'm the communications director for the WASPI campaign.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Steve Darwin for the first question.
Thank you. Thank you very much for making yourselves available today to come before the committee. It's really appreciated. So the Ombudsman found maladministration when he explored this area. I just wondered if you could unpack for us how this impacted on WASPI women, and whether the other area that I'd be really grateful for you to unpick for us as well is whether this impacted differently on different sectors of WASPI women in your understanding of the challenges that your group face.
Shall I start perhaps with an overview of where we are now? I think it would be fair to say that WASPI women are really angry after the response to the Ombudsman's advice. And not without justification, because we worked and we paid national insurance and we looked after children and we cared for our elderly relatives. And many of the things that Danielle referred to today will resonate very closely with WASPI women's experience. We approached our retirement and found that the government increased our state pension age by up to 6 years, and if that wasn't enough, they didn't tell us that they were going to do that. Our campaign has never been about the loss of state pension, but it's been about the lack of notice that women received and the impact that that had on those women. We've campaigned for 10 years, so it's our 10-year anniversary, and 6 of those was an Ombudsman's investigation. And we awaited the result, and we were exonerated, so we were very delighted. The Ombudsman found that there had been maladministration. However, the DWP doesn't accept the findings. So WASPI women are upset and angry, and they feel let down and they feel betrayed. And they don't understand how it's possible that findings of maladministration have been shown, but it doesn't lead to redress for them.
Anybody else who wants to come in as well?
The impact of maladministration. I mean, what happened, as you know, is we're all women affected by the same injustice. But you're right, it does affect people in different ways. Numerous women who worked maybe full-time had given up work to care for elderly relatives. We did plan for our retirement. Mostly, that's what we hear from our members. We planned for our retirement, but we expected that retirement to start at 60. And if you've already given up work in your late 50s, maybe in your mid-50s, depending on what your circumstances are, 4, 5, 6 years later, whenever you heard about the law changing, it's very, very difficult to get back in, because I believe certainly for us there was discrimination in the workplace, and I believe age discrimination still exists in the workplace. The earlier panel I heard saying, people do get into poverty while they're waiting for their state pension now in their early 60s, and perhaps that's because they can't get the same level of work that they got when they were younger. Who knows? Skills lapse. Nurses, their accreditation runs out after 2 or 3 years, and if they thought they were retiring forever, they don't renew that, and then to renew that after a gap is very difficult for them. And many people had to take more poorly paid work during those years, if they could get that work, to get by. Some people were lucky enough to have savings, and of course those who, it was a huge level of retirement income that we lost, £50,000 in some cases, and many of us had to use our savings, or rather than helping our families in the way that we would have liked to, our families had to help us. And that felt demeaning. The women who had those assets, like their savings or perhaps houses, they perhaps had to sell their houses and move into rented accommodation, which then has a huge impact on their lives in the future. We've heard of some women house sharing with strangers. Now, we did that when we were students. We certainly didn't expect to do it at this stage of our lives. So women have been impoverished by the way we've been treated. And we are now shocked again because the Ombudsman suggested that we were being compensated for stress, lack of notice, the anxiety, the shock, all the adjustments we had to make, some that we couldn't make. And the compensation recommended by them is a very small sum because of that. 3,000 maximum for anyone suffering from those injustices. And that really adds more injury to the injustices we've already suffered. And our campaign has always been about securing the redress for injustice, not about returning the lost state pension.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Jill German.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for joining us. So you've already mentioned that you've been campaigning since 2015, so fair to say it's been a long road. And so we're under a new government, and the DWP under that government has accepted the maladministration and committed to learning from it, which I think when we look back at some of the stages before, would seem to be a development. I wondered what you thought about this. So bearing in mind that previously the DWP didn't accept that there was any maladministration, is this a significant development to have that acknowledgement?
Well, yes, we welcome the acknowledgement and the apology. And we also welcome the fact that things will change in the future, but it's too late for WASPI women. The damage has been done for us. And the redress that we're seeking is acknowledgement, and for the stress and worry, because for the women who found out with very short notice that they weren't going to be receiving their state pension, it put their retirement plans completely into turmoil. And women report to us the distress that it has caused them, and so that's what the compensation is for. And it's right that the government consider how things could improve in the future, but for us it's too late. The damage has been done.
I'd like to just build a bit on that about the DWP disagreeing with the PHSO. And one of the questions I have to ask is, when did they actually disagree with the PHSO? Because their evidence in 2005 said that they decided that letters should be sent to women affected at that time because they knew that a majority of women didn't know about the change to their state pension age. I think that referred to a 2004 survey where at least 50% of WASPI women whose pension age was changing from 60 to 65 still thought their state pension was 60. So they had evidence at that time that they relied on. And of course the Ombudsman agreed with that evidence and also noted that they didn't act on it quickly enough. Even though that decision was made in 2005, they still didn't start sending letters to women until 2009. And they could have started sending them much earlier. Some women could have had nearly 4 years more notice than they got from the Ombudsman, from the DWP, according to the Ombudsman, and that would have given them a lot more time to adjust their retirement plans. For me and others, that additional notice would have meant that I might not have stopped working full time to care. I might have chosen to share caring with part-time working. And of course, the PHSO and the DWP says that decision doesn't lead to direct financial loss. But the result of that financial decision, the result of that decision has a huge impact financially. If I'd had that extra notice, it would have saved me a lot of money. But I lost that opportunity to make that decision. And that's what lost opportunity actually means here. You know, it's not something like missing out on going to a concert or, you know, missing a birthday or something. It's an actual decision that made an incredible difference to your life.
Thank you. If I could just follow up quickly. So you've spoken about how there's quite significant amounts of money that you feel that women have lost as a result of the maladministration, which is clearly there as being recognised and that it absolutely mustn't happen again. So do you think that the amount that the Ombudsman has recommended is a fairly small amount? So I wondered what your thoughts were on the impact of that broad brush approach, I suppose, to support those women who were particularly financially left worse off.
Well, when we spoke at the committee the last time, of course some of you weren't here then, we spoke about an additional process for claiming if you could prove that you'd had significant financial loss. And I think the committee agreed and wrote to the Department of Work and Pensions at the time, asking for this two-pronged approach, so that what the Ombudsman recommended was for everyone who'd suffered from the injustice, which suggested a rules-based system for that, but then to run alongside an application-based system, which wouldn't be overly onerous, but would allow people to prove that their financial losses were greater than the report went into.
So in addition to...
In addition to, yes, and running alongside a more complete rules-based system.
And for some women, £1,000 or up to £3,000 compensation will make a big difference to them. Even though it doesn't cover what they might have lost, it's an acknowledgement that there has been a maladministration.
It's that
an acceptance of that, absolutely, yeah. Because we feel disempowered, we feel we're sort of being airbrushed out of history almost. Sort of move on. We've done the WASPI issue, and it hasn't been resolved as far as WASPI women are concerned by any means.
Thank you.
Baxter.
Thank you for taking the time to come and see us today. I just wanted to turn to the issue of communication, because a lot of discussion has focused on letters and whether or not there would have been an impact, material impact of sending letters at an earlier stage. What's your view on that?
Well, I think sending letters is absolutely vital, and I think there's this question of whether women would have read the letters or not. I think if you'd got a letter and it came in a brown envelope and it said, this contains significantly important information about your retirement future, you must read this, it would have been different. And it would have been different too if the letters that we had sent had included detailed information, so that women were very clear about what the implication was for them, or saying to them, if you're not sure about this, make inquiries, contact the pensions service. So I think that there was a lot more that could have been done with those letters. And we don't agree that women wouldn't have read the letters, because if women hadn't read their letters when they started sending them out in 2009, there wouldn't have been a WASPI campaign. And the DWP have sent out letters to millions of people about the removal of the winter fuel allowance. So presumably they acknowledge that it is a worthwhile exercise when you're trying to communicate important information to people.
Given the sort of information age in which we live, do you think there are better ways of communicating that might be different to and or in addition to hard copy letters sent by snail mail.
Absolutely, and we live in an electronic age, and many women, are using modern technology, but many WASPI women are not using modern technology. Some of them have trouble, copy and pasting a letter or accessing those kind of services. So I think there needs to be a variety of communication channels. But crucially, I think the letter is absolutely essential. All the information that you must do something about this. The advertising campaign that did happen was very vague. It wasn't specific about the increase of the state pension age. Otherwise, far more of us would have known. So, crucial information given clearly in a variety of ways, accurate and up to date on the website, that kind of thing, would be the right thing.
And I guess just playing devil's advocate, given what you've said in terms of the campaign and it being vague in your words, is there anything else, do you think, that women might have done in terms of questioning that with government at the time?
At the time, up until 2016, on the landing page of the government's website, the DWP website, it stated that women's state pension was 60 and men's was 65. It was Ros Altman that changed that when we told her about it, because that is part of the evidence that women used. Now, as Debbie said, we weren't that computer savvy, but when we saw it on the official website, then, we believed it. We believed that. Those of us who were fortunate enough to be in government-owned companies with pension schemes. I mean, I worked for the post office up until 2004, and I got a benefit statement from the post office pension scheme saying all the benefits in that scheme were in addition to state pension benefits, because a lot of schemes operated this clawback position, but of course the government-owned pension schemes didn't. So there was plenty of information out there for people who telling them that the state pension age was 60. Yes, maybe they could have done more. There was emails at the time. Maybe we could have got emails. We certainly read emails, especially from official sources. And of course, for tomorrow's pensioners, maybe they should start using text. And, we find most of our women now have mobile phones, not necessarily laptop computers or desktops or anything like that. So actually, harvesting that generation of mobile phone users is perhaps a better way of communicating for the future. But we didn't even have mobile phones in our day, so that wouldn't have worked either. No.
It's very quick now. We know that most of our supporters follow us on social media and pick things up instantly. But it wasn't like that. And so as I said, the damage was done then, and moving forward it would be different.
Just going on to the PHSO's approach to remedy. So the government have argued that a compensation scheme which would cost up to £10.5 billion can't be justified in the circumstances, and that a scheme based on individual circumstances would take many, many years and require thousands of staff to process. So what's your view about that dilemma, if you like?
Well, they've talked about it not being good value for taxpayers. Yeah. We surveyed recently adults, a statistically sound survey conducted by Yonder on our behalf amongst 2,079 adults. And this survey was between 3rd and 5th of January 25. And the question we asked was, the government should follow the Ombudsman's recommendation to compensate WASPI women. Now, 74% of that population agreed with that statement. And in that 2,079 adults, amongst 18 to 65-year-olds, made up 70% of that. So 70% of working adults today are saying the government should afford it. They should pay us back. And that's, you know, just down slightly from the 74% if you include pensioners. And of course, that argument also flies in the face of the Ombudsman's view that the availability of resources should not be a barrier to compensation. And resources have always been tight. You know, it is difficult for the government to make these sort of compensation schemes. But with respect, that's the job. You know, you're in the job, the government's in the job to fix things that have gone wrong. There have been other large-scale compensation schemes in recent years. For example, trusting in the pensions promise, very similar to our complaint. It was about lack of or incorrect information, which was judged to be maladministrative, and resulting injustice was remedied by financial payments. Now, a total of 12.5 billion was paid out under that scheme, and I'm sure times were difficult then. It's not really a fair thing to say. Because we're in a mess, you kind of have to pay for it, even though you've already suffered. You've already had injustices. I mean, what point is there of having a process where we can complain if our rights have been violated, if the government is then just going to say, no, tough, times are tough, it's not good enough?
We're mindful too that the government saved over £200 billion increasing the state pension age just for WASPI women, and so the amount of compensation that we're asking is just a tiny fraction of that, acknowledging that there was error and as redress for that.
I think what I was trying to just pull out was the tension between sort of a blanket compensation approach and something which was individualised, and how long and difficult that individual approach might be, and whether you've got any thoughts on the two, because they're quite different.
Well, one would be, yes, the direct financial loss would require women to provide some evidence, but the original scheme that we talked about previously when we spoke to the committee was that it should be a simple flat rate of payment related to the amount of notice that women had and how fast the rise was in their state pension age. So we think of it rather as a bell curve. So women at the beginning of the decade had the shortest time to wait. Women at the end of the decade had the longest length of notice, and it was the women in the middle who were most severely affected with the steepest rise and the shortest amount of notice. So the DWP know when they send the letters, they have all that information, and so it would be quite easy to pick out the level of injustice that women suffered within that decade. It's not enormously complicated, with the direct financial loss being separate, because that will take time, and we know that a WASPI woman is dying every 12 minutes, so we don't have time for a very long and complicated and drawn out process of applying for something. There isn't time. But we appreciate that for direct financial loss that will take longer. But the first part of the compensation process could be simple and quick and sensitive in that way.
Thank you. John Mill.
Thank you. The government has stated both that it does not accept the Ombudsman's report and that even if it did, it doesn't have enough money to pay compensation anyway. This does feel like killing one bird with two stones. In the light of this very difficult news, do you see any way? What solutions or actions do you think you can take from this point?
The government did accept that there has been maladministration and provided the apology. The only bit that hasn't happened is the redress for the reasons that have already been discussed. We'll do what we have always done at every stage over the 10 years, is to take legal advice as to what our options are, and we'll continue to lobby and talk with our MPs and supporters that we have in Parliament, and we know that we have an enormous amount of support in Parliament. There was a debate last Wednesday where MPs from all parties spoke very passionately about their concern about the constitutional issue, that the decisions of the Ombudsman can be ignored, and questioning what's the point of the Ombudsman and how can that be right. And that's certainly something that WASPI women are asking. How can that be right? We have almost 150,000 women on Facebook, and the response was phenomenal. They were just completely amazed. And one of the MPs said when he heard, his jaw hit the floor. So it really was a shock, a nasty shock. And we haven't got over it yet, really.
And of course, the recommendation that hasn't been accepted is that it's for Parliament to decide, not the Department of Work and Pensions, not the government without consulting Parliament. So we feel, I mean, those MPs represent us. There are, around 6,000 more in some constituencies, less in others. And if our representatives in Parliament aren't given their say, then that kind of cuts out another aspect of democracy in terms of this particular decision.
And do you feel that whatever might be said about current finances, that the government should have left the door open for action in the future with where finances might be permitting?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Perhaps this year it might have been difficult for them to make that decision, but it shouldn't be unmade totally.
We've always been pragmatic and open to discussion and conversation, and we welcome those discussions and those conversations. And I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned is that it's been said that 90% of WASPI women knew about the increase to their state pension age, and there isn't any evidence to back up that sum, and that statistic has been quoted by so many people, and WASPI women can't understand that either. So we would welcome if there was an opportunity for the Secretary of State to come and talk to you and explain how she reached that figure, because it's a mystery to us.
Very much agree with that, and I'll be talking about it in the next panel, in fact, but thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for coming to give evidence to the committee. We very much appreciate your testimony here, so thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there. I was going to give you a formal introduction, but we'll start off. It's a pleasure to welcome the last panellist, the Deputy Ombudsman for the Parliamentary and Health Service, Ombudsman, and it's Karl Bannister. So very warm welcome, Karl. I don't know if you want to say some opening remarks in terms of you, because you have another role as well, as apart from being the Deputy Ombudsman.
Yes, I'm Deputy Ombudsman at the Parliamentary and Health Service Ombudsman. I'm also Director of Operations, Legal and Clinical, so I'm responsible for the entire casework operation. And in fact, I worked on the investigation into women's state pension age communication from the start. So I'll say that, and the other thing I wanted to say is just to convey the apologies of Rebecca Hilsenrath, who's the Ombudsman, who couldn't be here today, and I hope I can channel her to some extent. I know she's met you, and she really welcomes the interest of the committee in the issue, so thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So I just wanted to refer, first of all, if I may, to the statement that was made following the government statement by the Ombudsman, and it was a very magnanimous statement from the Ombudsman, and she was pleased that the government recognised mistakes had been made and made a commitment, and there had been a genuine commitment from the Secretary of State that this would never happen again. and I'm quoting from the statement, she said she looked forward to hearing about the action plan to take this forward and in terms of the work with the government in this in the future. I just wondered if you'd heard from the government, if that offer had been taken up by yourselves.
I think so. We will take up that offer, definitely. We've, I think, started the conversation about a working party, but we're at the stage at the moment of terms of reference for that. So yes, we welcome the offer. I think I'd sort of say a couple of things. So I mean, magnanimous. Thanks for the sort of the description there. I think sort of to unpack. We are pleased that the government has said yes, there was maladministration. We're pleased that the government has apologised. Those are the positives. That's the glass half full. On the other side, it's not helpful, in our view, that the government has then sort of undermined some of that in some of the ways it's responded in saying, but we don't accept that women didn't know, picking out some aspects of the surveys, but not all the surveys and so on women's knowledge. It would have been better if it had just been a straight, we accept maladministration. But that's where we are, and we are definitely going to work with the government. It is welcome. We are about two things. One of them is remedy where there's been injustice, yes, individual complaints, or in this case, groups of complaints. But the other massive thing for us is improvement for the future. And we're optimistic that we'll get somewhere with this. So that is very pleasing.
Thank you. Can I move on to that last point and thinking about the 6 sample cases you took? Now, these were 6 selected samples, as I understand. Please correct me if I have this wrong, but 6 samples of a caseload of about 600, and you had to close it at that stage. But they were selected to represent the case types that you had from that 600. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's an unusual investigation for us, and we realised that we were going to be swamped with complainants. We didn't have the resources to handle that, and so we conducted an exercise to try and think about what themes we were seeing in the complaints, and then essentially to select some sample complainants that best reflected those themes, and then treat those complainants as the representatives of the whole group. So there's a chance we didn't pick, we're bound not to have picked up every possible variation, but we did our best with the 600 to find those themes.
And on those 6 sample cases, and they were, I remember in the previous committee that we had details of them. Have you had indication from the government that they are looking to compensate those particular individual cases?
No, we haven't. And that is unusual. So there have been other investigations where we've made what you might call systemic recommendations alongside having an individual complainant. And in those cases, government has normally compensated the individual complainant. I can only speculate that because we've said remedy goes to Parliament, because we've said this is a broad-based remedy, that the DWP has taken the view that it won't do that. But they haven't.
Can I just refer you to another set of cases, and I think this was in terms of the DWP's handling of migration to employment support allowance. Does this, or if there wasn't redress provided to these 6 individual cases, would this be slightly different to the case around employment support allowance migration?
Well, there is so that in that case, that was a case where someone was incorrectly not given employment support allowance, and it was a very significant impact on the individual concerned. I think the remedy was around £19,000 for the individual, and they were in poverty. In that case, we'd said that we could see from the circumstances there were upwards of 118,000 people would be in the same position, and our recommendation to DWP was that they should fine those people, because what we'd seen was we'd had a single complaint about that, and that this was clearly a class of people who were not aware of their rights. And that was unsurprising in the circumstances, and the DWP should fine the complainants in those cases. They haven't done that. They have had more complaints since then, but not significant numbers. I suppose the difference is there was a direct establishable loss there, whereas here what we've done is looked at our severity of injustice scale and said, this is a loss of opportunity. This is people never knowing whether they could have done something different, and we have a way of dealing with that, which is we look at our severity of injustice scale. So it's a different kind of financial remedy, but essentially the same in the sense that we've set a figure, and it is open to the department to pay that figure.
Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Frank McNally.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, Karl, and thanks for joining us today, and thanks for the work of the PHSO on this matter over many years. My colleague Jill German asked a very similar question to Angela and Debbie at the previous panel, particularly linked to the report. So we know the initial report and subsequent report went without any action from the previous government, effectively put on a shelf and ignored. The DWP previously didn't accept the findings, but as the Chair and yourself have touched on, have now accepted that there was maladministration, have apologised and have committed to learning from that. How significant a step do you think that is, based on sort of the journey with this issue over a number of years?
Well, so how significant a step is it that the government's committed to learning? Essentially, is that the question?
And accepted the maladministration and apologised.
So I think it is really important. I think it is extremely problematic to have a parliamentary ombudsman that represents Parliament in scrutinising government, and for government to not accept its recommendation, its finding on maladministration, its pure finding. I think that is problematic, and it is very pleasing that we're not in that position, that that's moved on. I think it's very pleasing that government's committed to learning. That's crucial. We're nothing if we're not helping government to learn from previous mistakes. That's very important to us. I think you could overstate the learning government will do, because, I mean, if I can find it, it's not new that government's committed to communicating about pensions. So if we look at our report, you can quote from our report, sort of the first report we did, paragraph 51. This is going way back. This is going back to the time of the events. DWP said all information provided by DWP should be appropriate, relevant, correct, up-to-date, clear, concise, to the point, helpful and targeted. And it stated it's widely accepted that the department has a duty to give informational advice to inform the public about any new policies and developments that may affect them. And there's more. I could quote more, but it's the point I'm making there is it's not new that it's accepted. It's always been accepted that it's a responsibility in this context to communicate. What is good about this commitment is working with us to think about ways to do that better, and we really welcome that.
And obviously in a timely manner as well.
Yes,
that
absolutely.
Engagement must take place.
Absolutely, timely is everything.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Steve Darling.
Thank you. So in May, the Parliamentary and Health Services Ombudsman stated that if the government was to do nothing with the report, then it could undermine or constitutionally undermine the organisation. Seeming that we're looking at half a loaf today, and it's probably the most significant part of the loaf that is the payment out to those affected. Have you been made a toothless tiger?
So it's obviously the headline cases make the news, but in I think 99.9% of our investigations, there is full compliance with our recommendations. So that's whether it's an apology, policy change, financial remedy, all of it. So this is extremely unusual, but the headline cases are headline cases for a reason. They kind of set the tone. I think we're only a toothless tiger if Parliament steps away from supporting us when there isn't compliance. The way the legislation is set up envisages this relationship where we make a report, departments are not obliged to implement our recommendations, but they are obliged to be accountable to Parliament as long as Parliament makes sure that happens. And if that does happen, then I don't think there's a constitutional problem. So the reference to a constitutional problem, I think it was me that said it. My reference there was, at that time, it felt unclear what was happening on the back of the report.
Thank you. And would it be helpful if it was legislative or legislated that government should accept findings of the Ombudsman, full stop?
That sounds simple, but we have never asked for that. And the reason we've never asked for that is because we are not a regulator, and it starts to bring with it tinges of regulation. All organisations where there is enforceability in effect of recommendations, litigation becomes a much bigger factor. You see that across the piece. So it's something we've never asked for. It's something, obviously, we're not the only ones. Whether we ask or not, Parliament has its own view about these things. Of course it does. But for what it's worth, I've pointed out that in most cases, the vast majority of cases, there is compliance. And actually compliance is very high, the highest in organisations we have the most to do with. So the health service, virtually, I can't think of a case where we haven't had compliance in a health service case, where we do 80% of our work. So we haven't asked for that, and I think it brings a whole lot of things with it. It's quite a complex question.
Thank you.
Thank you. John Mill.
Thanks, Chair. The government has said, and I quote, that you did not properly take into account all the relevant evidence. In particular, it was claimed that 90% of women understood the change in 2006, but that was a survey based on a sample of just 170 women and is contradicted by multiple other figures. For example, the DWP found in 2007 that 50% of women whose pension age had risen to between 60 and 65 still thought it was just 60. In view of this, do you think that it was reasonable for the Secretary of State to use the 90% figure again and again as key justification for not paying compensation?
So I think it's not ideal, because I think it's clear from our report that there are various ways of looking at awareness, and that the ways that the department itself deployed at the time had lower figures for awareness than that. And in the end, the fundamentals are here in making a decision. DWP itself, at the time, knew that women did not know who they wanted to know, which was contradictory to their statement about how they operate that I read out earlier. So it accepts women didn't know, and actually, in a way, it's a red herring about the numbers. It accepts women that didn't know. It accepted at the time, and it had identified that and thought it should do something about it. The whole case, the whole investigation is simply about that. DWP knew that was not what it wanted, and it didn't act on what it itself said it should do at the time. That's the maladministration. So it's not helpful to introduce a debate about the numbers of people, because it's accepted the maladministration. I think then there's a sort of conversation about whether and how, if you accept this maladministration, you accept people affected by that maladministration, how you factor in cost into the need to do justice. And remembering that a scheme, you've had conversations earlier about what sort of scheme you might apply, that the cost of a scheme doesn't have to be the flat rate scheme across the piece, the £10 billion cost scheme. There are ways to limit the cost of scheme by the way it's applied, and I can talk a bit more about that if that's useful.